Good afternoon. Let's get started. Okay. We have quite a bit to finish today. You go through. Abby, put your stuff down. We're not registering anymore. Let's go. All right. So we left off. We went through the general anatomy of. Oh, I'm stressing everybody out. Okay. We went through the general anatomy of the respiratory system. Talked about the overview, the functions of the respiratory system. And we're at this part where we were talking the anatomy of the upper respiratory system, and we just started the lower respiratory system. We had covered the structure of the trachea. And the general structure of the trachea is what? How would you describe it? Let's pick on Gianna. How would you describe the structure of the trachea? Gross anatomy. I'm not going to tell you what I'm looking for. Rings of cartilage. Okay, what type? What C-shaped rings? And what's the function of the trachea? Lily?
I said move down food.
Move down food? Not food. Air. Okay, air. Right? Moves down air. And what about the lining, the interior lining of the trachea? What type of cells line the trachea? Emma? Pseudostratified. Right? Pseudostratified epithelium. And what else do they have that are specialized for it? Cilia. And what do the cilia do? They move mucus. And that mucus that comes up, and what is that called altogether? Sputum. Okay, good. All right. Other parts of the lower respiratory system. Okay, so we have our trachea, okay, which a 4-inch long tube, which then splits into primary bronchi, one to each lung. All right, so this is the lung inside the lungs inside the thoracic cavity. We'll go over. You'll see this again later. Okay. This is what the lungs look like from the superior view. Okay. Here you have primary bronchi that have been split off the trachea. What's this right here? What's this tube right there? The esophagus. Good. All right. And we have pulmonary arteries and veins that split to either side of the body for left and right lungs, and then it breaks off into different sections. All right. Then goes down through circulation. Okay. So here you have the different parts of the lungs, right, and what they look like. The lungs are found within the overall the thoracic cavity, and then inside of that is a pleural cavity. Okay, so the thoracic cavity with the thorax, the rib cage, okay, and inside of that is the pleural cavity where the lungs are found. Okay, each lung is served, air gets into each lung, left and right, by a primary bronchi. So we've gone from trachea to primary bronchi, or main bronchi, right? Primary, I'll use this designation, 1 to the degree symbol means primary. All right, primary bronchi. So our C-shaped ring, a cartilaginous ring tube, comes down and splits into two. And the cartilage that's found in the trachea continues into the bronchi. And as you get further away from the trachea, the cartilage becomes less continuous. Right? Instead of one C-shaped piece, it's broken into smaller sections. Okay? So each bronchi enters the lung at the medial depression, or what we call the hilum. Right? The right bronchus is wider, shorter, and straighter than the left. Why? Why would the right bronchus especially be shorter and straighter than the left? What's the difference between right and left? Lungs.
The heart is on the left side, so something to do with the shape of, so it can be more like straight up and down to go around the heart.
All right, so the heart takes up part of the left side, right, of the thoracic cavity. So the lung is pushed further away from the median or the midline. Okay? The midline is where the most of the trachea comes down. So if it's pushed off to the left primary bronchi is a little bit longer than the right primary bronchi, right? Because just where it is. And then from there, primary bronchi break into smaller and smaller branches. And remember, this is part of what we call the conducting zone, the area of the respiratory system that is moving air. Air just moves through. It does not contain or does not include the area of the respiratory system where gas exchange occurs. Air is just moving through. Okay, so here you have your larynx, the trachea, where the trachea splits the right main bronchus versus the left main bronchus, and here you can, it's evident that you can see that the left bronchus is a little bit longer than the right, right, and it bends. Okay, the heart would be right in this area right here, right, with the great vessels being behind the lungs right there. Okay, so the heart takes up that pericardial area where of the mediastinum. Okay, so we break from primary bronchi to secondary bronchi to tertiary bronchi. So here's our primary bronchus, left main bronchus, that's a main. Then a lobar one is a secondary, segmental or tertiary. Okay, so primary, secondary, tertiary. Main, lobar, segmental. Okay? You may notice that there are 3 parts to the lung on the right and 2 parts to the lung on the left. Right? Those black lines now show the designation between them. Okay? Bless you. Okay, so here's one section. I'll just outline it. Here's a second section. Okay, and then this section. So you can see the differences in what it looks like. So there's your 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Lobes, right? Lobes. And each lobe of the lung is served by a lobar bronchi or bronchus. Okay? And then from there, within the lobes of the lung, they break into segmental bronchi. All right, so this is a kind of breaking it down and taking the major ones. Okay, here's your main bronchi or your primary, lobar or secondary, eventually segmental or tertiary. And then there's even smaller ones. Then it breaks down to bronchioles, eventually to terminal and respiratory bronchioles. And down here, this down here is your respiratory zone. Okay? And what you also notice on the right, it says cartilage versus no cartilage. As you move down these bronchi, the presence of cartilage gets less and less evident. Okay? Eventually, you get down to the alveolar duct or the alveolus. There are no cartilages because we don't want anything to impede our process of gas exchange. And that's what the cartilage in that area would do. Okay? Clear? Structure, function, right? Structure keeps the cartilage is present within the conducting zone. Its function is to conduct air, right? To keep those airways open. So the cartilage helps give support to that. Okay? Eventually the bronchioles there's no more cartilage, and eventually those are replaced by some smooth muscle, and then you have the respiratory zone of the alveoli, which also lack cartilage. Okay? What you see in this little inset here, the cross section of bronchioles. Okay? Bronchioles help to limit or let's say regulate or control airflow. Okay? As bronchioles are open, they're dilated, what happens to airflow? Let's use the analogy. What happened to blood flow in blood vessels when we dilated vessels? Amanda.
It's going to allow more air into the lungs.
All right, so it's going to, just like in the blood vessels, it would allow more blood to flow through. This would allow air to flow through easier. Okay? When you constrict bronchioles, less space, less diameter, less or restricted flow. Okay? In what type of situation would you see, clinical situation, would you see constricted bronchioles? Bronchitis, right? Inflammation, bronchitis is inflammation of the bronchioles or the bronchi. Okay? Usually bronchitis is associated with what? Is a infection, whether it be viral or bacterial. Okay? Give me another clinical aspect where you will see this, maybe a more acute situation. Colin. Asthma. Okay? Asthma happens as bronchioles become constricted. Okay? And it has inflammation of the bronchioles that are caused by two different types of inflammation. But asthma, right? How many of you have ever had an asthma attack? I have, right? So a lot of times asthma happens as you're growing. Okay? You have adolescent or juvenile asthma and you grow out of it. Right? Asthma feels like someone's compressing your chest and you can't move air in and out as well because your bronchioles are restricting flow. Bronchioles restrict flow. Air doesn't move in as well. CO2 builds up in the alveolar ducts, causes a bunch of problems. How many of you know someone with asthma? All right, so you know they have an inhaler, right? The inhaler comes in and it helps to reduce the smooth muscle constriction and open up bronchioles and allow air to go through. So primary, secondary, tertiary, bronchioles, eventually down to terminal bronchioles. All right? Terminal bronchioles then go into, that's the end point of the conducting zone. And then we move into alveolar, what we call respiratory bronchioles, and alveolar ducts, eventually down to alveolar sacs. All right, here's your respiratory zone, respiratory bronchioles, ducts, sacs, and then the alveoli, right, the air sacs themselves. Gas exchange only occurs in the alveoli, all right, because that is where the blood is going to be. Right, that's where the capillary netting is going to be. You'll see a picture of this in a little while. Right, a histology of an alveolar sac that's cut in half, and you see all the different capillaries that are involved. Right, and we'll talk about the cells that line the alveoli as well. All right, so conducting zone versus respiratory zone. All right, here's another picture of it. Alveolar duct. All right, so respiratory bronchioles. There's a terminal bronchiole, and now you get to the duct here. This is a duct. Right, this is an alveolar duct. Okay, and at the end of the alveolar duct are alveoli. Right, this whole thing right here is an alveolar sac. You see here, cut through it, you see this is the alveolar duct. Air goes through and ends up in these alveolar sacs. And within those alveolar sacs, sometimes there is little things called alveolar pores. Right, so that each of those alveoli, let's zoom in here and show you this one. Okay, you actually see here in this picture, these alveoli have connections. Okay, right, those little black lines show connections. So think about this kind of bubble, right? That's what the alveolar sac is, this bubble, but it's a bubble that's attached to another little bubble. And air can go between those two bubbles. Okay, through this alveolar pore. Okay? So the movement of air goes down through here, eventually through all these different parts, through the alveolar pores, and down through the sac itself. Okay? Where would blood vessels be in this case? Notice they're not shown. Where would you find and expect to see capillaries that are going to oxygenate, help move gas, perform gas exchange?
Would they be in the pores?
They would not be in the pores. Right? Remember that what happens with the air? Air never technically crosses cells. It's never technically internalized, right? So air comes down through the ducts, down through the alveolar ducts, eventually down to the alveolus. It's still technically outside of the body. It has not crossed a cell barrier. Okay? So the blood vessels are actually, capillaries, are like netted around, along the outside of the alveoli. So it looks something like that. Okay? So imagine that each of these alveolar sacs has a netting of capillaries that go and surround it. Okay? And that blood runs through there. Then you have gas exchange that occurs between the blood and the the air within the alveolus. Okay? So our capillary would be out here, right? And then gas exchange would occur between there. Okay? This is CO2 out, or say CO2 and O2 in. All right? And you'll see some more pictures of that in a little bit. All right? This is what the capillary beds look like. All right? Little netting that surrounds each of the alveoli, which allows for gas exchange. Okay? So here you have pulmonary, right? So terminal bronchiole, air comes down, and here's your branch of your pulmonary vein. Pulmonary vein is going to carry what type of blood? Oxygenated or deoxygenated? Oxygenated, right? So it's coming off of there. The pulmonary artery blood comes off the pulmonary artery back to the capillary beds. The pulmonary capillary beds branches off, becomes oxygenated, and then collects back into the pulmonary vein before it's returned back to the heart. Okay? This is what the alveoli look like. Okay? Each lung about 300 to 400 million. Here's talk about pores. They're surrounded by capillaries, and they have what's called an interalveolar septum, a separation between them. Not only there's pores, but there's separation between alveolar themselves that help them to be structurally separate and contain elastic fibers. So when you cut the lung in sections and you look at it, it looks like a sponge. Has a spongy look to it because of all the air and the alveolar sacs that are present. Here's the terminal bronchiole. These little pieces are alveoli. And then, so terminal bronchiole, respiratory bronchiole, alveolar duct. And you have alveoli right off of the alveolar duct. Here's another picture of the lung. All right, I like this one because it's nice and big. You can see it. All right, these are the final divisions of the respiratory tree. We've gone all the way from trachea, bronchi, primary, secondary, tertiary, bronchioles, right? Terminal bronchioles, respiratory bronchioles. When we get to the respiratory zone, alveolar ducts, alveolar sacs, alveoli. Okay, so you should be able to follow the path of air as it is inhaled from nose all the way down to alveolus. Right? Yes? You could do that? I hope so. All right? In the alveoli, there is what we call the respiratory membrane. In the brain, we have a separation between neurons and the blood. Right? What is that called? The blood-brain barrier. Here, we have a separation between the air we inhale and the blood. That is the air-blood barrier, also known as the respiratory membrane. Okay? This respiratory membrane is composed. What does this membrane need to be? Everyone's like,
Grapes. Yeah.
little crepes? Okay, thin. It needs as thin as possible. Okay? So what you end up with is almost two thin cells on either side of a shared basal lamina. Okay? So what you have here on the right picture, okay, here's the alveolus, air's in here. There's one simple squamous epithelial cell that lines the alveolus, or there's a continual epithelium in there, right? That's one of them. And then on the opposite side, there's an endothelium. Endothelial cells line blood vessels. Okay? So there's an endothelial cell that lines the capillary blood vessel here. Right? There's two of them. Okay? And in between that, you have a basal lamina that's in green. Okay? A shared basal lamina. Both the simple squamous epithelial cell and the endothelial cell are epithelial cells. They need to be attached to something. Okay? That's what the basal lamina is. So what you have, in effect, are two cells with a shared basal lamina that are separating the air from the blood. This allows for gas exchange to occur, right? O2 here, CO2 there. The cells that line the alveolus, the simple squamous cells, those are also called type 1 alveolar cells, or type 1, what we call pneumocytes. All right, pneumocytes, pneumocytes. Okay, so if we have type 1 pneumocytes, what are you expecting? It's like when you're writing an outline, if you put down one section A, you have to have at least, there's probably another type of pneumocyte. All right, and we'll get to that in a second. Okay, so here's the alveolar sac, picture from your book, right? You see here on this side, there are erythrocytes, right? Where the erythrocyte's going to be found within the, right, within the capillaries, so blood cells. What do you notice about the structure of this red blood cell within this capillary? What do we know about red blood cells in capillaries? What do they have to do? How wide are capillaries? Right, they're one red blood cell thick, right? So we talked about how these red blood cells kind of stack up in capillaries. That's what's happening here, right? In order for the blood to slow down and become oxygenated, right? Or for gas exchange to occur. Okay, so we talked about type 1 cells. This whole thing right here in green is a type 1 cell. It provides the whole structure, the lining of the alveolar duct, okay, or alveolar sac. Here, okay, this is a type 2 cell, okay, an alveolar type 2 cell or type 2 pneumocyte. The alveolar type 2 cells produce what we call surfactant. And we'll go over what surfactant is and does in a few minutes. All right? And then we also have alveolar macrophages. Okay, alveolar macrophages. These cells are called dust cells. All right, when you inhale anything, any debris, cellular debris, stuff that doesn't get caught in that respiratory mucous membrane, is not removed or purified, some things get down there, the macrophages help clean it out. Okay? And it also will remove any broken and replaced, dead, damaged type 1 alveolar cells or type 2. Okay, here's another picture of your respiratory membrane and the epithelium that's involved. Okay? Questions? Okay, here's a write-up of the alveolar type 1 and type 2 cells. Right? 95% of the surface area within the lungs is covered by alveolar type 1 cells. Okay? The type 2 cells, also called septal cells, and they produce this pulmonary surfactant. Surfactant is an oily substance that helps. What does it do? You guys did it most of you did it in lab last week. What does it do? You did the Physio X with it. What does surfactant do? Abby?
Increase the surface area? No.
No. Close. So it has to do with surface. What?
It decreases surface tension.
It decreases surface tension. Okay? Most of your body cells are covered in some type of fluid. They're always washed in fluid. And that fluid is mainly what? Composed of what? Water. Okay? Water, because of its polarity and its molecular characteristics, is polar. It has a polarity, and it sticks together. Right? That cohesion actually produces surface tension. Okay? These alveolar sacs do not have any muscle. They are kept inflated based upon pressures within the lungs. Okay? So, surfactant is important to reduce that surface tension of the fluid which is within this alveolar sac so it doesn't collapse. Okay? It allows it to open easily. Okay? Because if you took two pieces of plastic, right, two plastic sheets, and covered one with water, stuck them together, right? Are they going to separate easily? No, you have to slide them apart, right? Because water has that type of surface tension. But if you reduce the surface tension with soap, dish soap, right, it'd be a lot easier to pull them apart. All right, and that's what happens within the alveoli. Okay, and then we went through our dust cells that are present within the alveolus. Questions? So I included these two pictures because this picture right here shows you the alveolus. It's been cut, right, one section of the alveolus, and what you have here, this whole thing is one alveoli. Here is another, and there is a third, and so every A is an alveolus. Okay? Whoops. So you see that? You have labeled here type 2 pneumocytes to each of those. They're bigger than type 1 pneumocytes. This is the nuclei of a type 1 pneumocyte, and it extends out. Okay, it extends out. Here's another nuclei of a type 1, it extends out. Right? There's so few of them that they're hard to see. I also wanted to include this for every C you see here, every little red dot are capillaries. Okay? So if you were kind of to imagine this in 3 dimension, you would have this circle, this kind of this amorphous circle, I should say, sphere of the alveolus that is going to be covered with multiple capillaries, and you have multiple types of cells within there, all right, forming your air-blood barrier. The M cell is what? What do you think the M cell is? Look at it. What do you think it is? Talked about type 1 pneumocytes, type 2 pneumocytes, capillaries. What's M? It's a macrophage. It's a dust cell. Okay? Bigger in size. It's not part, or it's really not part of the alveolar wall. Kind of runs through. This picture is a transmission electron micrograph showing you your air-blood barrier. So A for alveoli. This is one of those capillaries. Okay? With red blood cells in between. Here's a type 1 pneumocyte. Okay? You can see how close. Right? This is an endothelial cell. Right, here's an endothelial cell. Here's another one. That's what they're... Okay? And then your type 1 pneumocyte through here. Okay? You can see how close the air and blood are to one another so that you have efficient gas exchange. B here, B stands for the basal lamina. Okay? So you have another type 1 pneumocyte right there. Okay, what do you think this one is right here? What do you think this cell is down at the bottom? Where is it? What size is it? What do you think it does? No, this is the nucleus right here. Yeah. All right. So it is attached to the side. That's a type 2 pneumocyte. Okay? That's going to produce surfactant. Okay? And so it's kind of attached to this alveoli over here. Whoops. Okay? So overall gas exchange occurs at the air-blood barrier. Oxygen enters the blood, really binds to what specific molecule in the blood? Hemoglobin? Yeah. Hemoglobin. Okay. Carbon dioxide enters the alveoli. There's your dust cells. Add protection, pick up bacteria, particles, other debris, and your surfactant coats those gas-exposed molecules to help those alveoli to stay open. Okay? Questions on air, the respiratory zone, the conduction of air into the lungs? No? Good. Clear? As mud? All right. The lungs themselves, they occupy most of the thoracic cavity, right? They are found within the thoracic cavity in a separate cavity themselves, the pleural cavity. All right, the heart occupies the central portion, the mediastinum. Apex of the lung is at the top, that kind of comes to a point. The base sits on the diaphragm, in that inferior portion. And each lung is divided into lobes by fissures. Those lines I drew on the picture earlier are fissures. Right? The left has 2, the right has 3. Here's the lungs within the thoracic cage. Okay? Right base of the lung, the diaphragm. You have each of the lobes within the ribs. Apex at the top of the right lung actually comes right up underneath the clavicle. Apex of the left, same. Okay? And then you can see on this side over here, the costal surface, right? Different parts, the mediastinal surface. What you're laid out in terms of in the orange line is the thoracic cavity. Okay? And then each of the lungs themselves are separated from the mediastinal surface, the pericardial cavity, in either pleural cavity. So they have their own lining. Okay? There's a lot of moving parts in the thoracic cage, in the thoracic cavity. The lungs expand when you inhale, the heart's beating, right? So all of these surfaces that are moving are covered in serous membranes that help to reduce friction. Okay? more of the lungs, superior lobe or inferior lobe, right? So we have top and bottom, and on the right side you have a middle lobe, and then on the inferior surface your hilum, where bronchi enter and blood vessels enter. Those lobes are further broken into segments. So we talked about lobar bronchi, right? So we have main bronchi, which are primary, lobar bronchi, which are secondary, and then segmental bronchi that are tertiary. Here's the color coding of each segment part of each lobe of the lung. So you can imagine each different color has a separate segmental bronchi that enters into that portion of the lungs. Understand? And no, you don't need to know all of the different colors and the different names of the. This is just to show you that there is a mechanism. There's an order to the primary, secondary, and tertiary bronchi where they go. Okay? With gas exchange between the blood and the lungs and the air within the lungs have a circulation. They actually have two circulations. We've already covered the pulmonary circulation, right? What's the pulmonary circulation? Take me from the heart to the lungs and back. Show me the pulmonary circuit. Tell me, where do we start? Right atrium. Then we go to the, okay, then pulmonary trunk. Keep going. Pulmonary arteries, arterioles, right? Then we get to capillaries. The pulmonary capillaries are the ones that are on the outside of the alveoli. Okay? Then we go capillaries, venules, veins, pulmonary veins, back to the left atrium. The lungs are tissue too, right? And the bronchi that feed the lungs are tissues, and they have their own separate blood supply. Okay? So we have a pulmonary circulation where gas exchange occurs and blood becomes oxygenated. We also have a bronchial circulation where oxygenated blood is transported to the tissues of the lungs. All right, so we have both sections. So bronchial arteries, they branch off of the ascending and the descending aorta, and then the veins collect venous blood. And some of the bronchial vein blood goes into the pulmonary vein. Right, there's kind of a little bit of a mixing that occurs there. Very little, okay, depending upon where it is. But the bronchial circulation provide nutrients and oxygen support for the tissues of the lungs. They do not provide, or that does not provide external gas exchange with the external air. Okay? So here's the pulmonary circulation, right? Pulmonary artery where it branches back. You have your deoxygenated blood goes out and then comes back from gas exchange being oxygenated. Last thing we're going to cover today, innervation. You can consciously think about your breathing, right? And you can control it. It is also under innervation by parts of the brain that it is uncontrollable. It's involuntary. Okay? So you have the autonomic nervous system innervates the smooth muscles and the glands of the respiratory structures. So we have innervation of the autonomic nervous system, sympathetic and parasympathetic branches of the autonomic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system, input from the thoracic nerves, T1 to T5. They generally cause bronchodilation. Okay? And the parasympathetic from the vagus nerve causes bronchoconstriction. What is going to happen with sympathetic innervation. Bronchodilation, and then what's going to happen to your respiration rate? Everyone, thumbs up or thumbs down? It's going to go up or it's going to go down? Everyone. I'm still looking. Not here. Right? All right, it's going to go up. Okay? So think about sympathetic nervous system is exercise, excitement, embarrassment, right? So the bronchioles are going to be dilated, air is going to be able to flow more in and out, and you get an increased respiration. All right? And the parasympathetic constrict blood vessels, and it will cause less flow, and that will cause the respiration rate to go down. Okay? Questions on that? All right. So right now, I'm going to set up, before you leave, I want you to go through a couple questions on Socrative. You have a self-paced Socrative quiz to go through on